There are some, it's something that usually the couple, there's been some dream of it for years and years, in some cases since childhood. People have imagined what their wedding day was going to be like. On top of that, add the hopes, dreams, and expectations of parents, other family members. So it can be a very stressful thing. So I'm very proud of the fact that at least with the purchase of the Ketubah, thanks to my team's expertise, empathy, and real human customer service, the Ketubah is one thing that you can just relax. It's not something you're going to have to worry about. We're there to hold your hand every step of the way and make sure that everything is absolutely right.
You have found Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. Downloadable audio episodes can be found on the podcast link found at drawInCustomers.com. We are locally underwritten by the Bank of Sun Prairie, Calls on Call Extraordinary Answering Service, both business book as well as live switch. And today we're welcoming / preparing to learn from Michael Shapiro of Ketubah.com. And I got to say, Michael, I'm excited because we're talking about what looks to be some art that it's funny. I had no idea stuff like this existed. So let's start with the foundation. What do you do?
Absolutely. So Ketubah.com sells ketubahs. What is a ketubah? The ketubah at its core is the Jewish marriage contract. The traditional text of it goes back more than 2,000 years. And there's a tradition, which is only 1,000 years old, if you will, of making this document into something beautifully written and beautifully decorated.
Is this so thousands of years? I guess, tell me how that has translated over the course of modern times. Is it essentially the same that it was forever ago?
Very, very interesting. And I actually just published a book that looks into the history of this art form and then brings it up to date, because there was a very interesting ebb and flow, which is it all started that the tradition of decorating these started in the land of Israel and in Egypt about 1,000 years ago. It then moved through Europe all the way to Spain. And then after the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, it moved all throughout the Mediterranean and into the Middle East. Then over time, with the invention of the printing press and the application of the printing press to making inexpensive versions of this, the art form started to die out from sort of the late 1800s onwards. Then in North America, starting in the early 1970s, some Jewish artists in the United States and in Canada started to bring the art form back to life. And that's what the book is about. My book is called Ketubah Renaissance, and it's about the modern revival of this ancient art form in a North American context. And that really is what made my business possible.
Is incredible. It's so funny. Something that I would consider this to be pretty major, that I must be just living under a rock because I had never heard of these until connecting
James,
with you. So.
Don't feel too badly. I actually, until 1995, I wasn't aware of this tradition either. So my parents and grandparents just had a simple ketubah, a simple marriage document that was given to them by the rabbi just on a piece of paper, filed away. So that was from the period of time when this tradition of the beautifully decorated one had died out. So it was only in 1995 when I was studying in Jerusalem, networking with Judaica artists, with an idea to open a shop when I came back home to Canada, that I met my first Ketubah artist. So don't feel too bad, because I didn't know about this tradition either until 30 years ago, and then I started the company.
Right on. That is awesome. So tell me about the contract itself, right? Before we dive into the art, which is probably a more fun part. Tell me about the contract. Is this just a typical copy paste from every other marriage out there? Or is there some type of a conversation that happens between the parties, the husband and wife? That's what's going to be included there?
So yes and yes. So the handed down text has changed very little up until this period of the Ketubah revival, and it was a revolutionary text for its time. Imagine in biblical times, a woman on her own, with either because her husband died or because they became divorced. And divorce is allowed in Judaism, not encouraged, but it is allowed in Judaism. Woman and her children on their own could be in serious financial straits. So this was a document that basically was a little bit like, if you will, a prenup slash insurance, life insurance policy, which is that if she ended up on her own, she would have a financial sum that would be available to her so that she and her children would be okay. That very legal text changed very little up until, as I said, the early 1970s. Around the time, and this was one of the contributing factors that opened up the revival of the art form, there started to be a proliferation of texts. And these included texts that went outside of the religious legal framework that the original text had come down. By that time, not all Jews were practicing sort of Orthodox Judaism. There were Reform, there was conservative, and a whole range of texts that were more like what you're mentioning in your question. Many of them now are more like love documents, commitments of shared value, rather than a legalistic sort of a document.
Gotcha. It's interesting because I'm thinking that the men are essentially assigned to support the women. So if the guy goes away for whatever reason, divorce, death, whatever, woman is taken care of. Does it also? I mean, we're in a time now where that could be flipped, where the woman is the one making all the money. So does that go both ways?
You know what? That's a really interesting question. The traditional text, as far as I know, does not take that into account. And the more, I would say, contemporary texts, they don't get into the financial end of it at all. So I guess in that circumstance, it would really be up to the state laws in terms of when a couple divorces to make sure that they're treating each other fairly, versus the religious document requiring that.
Right on. And then last question in regards to the contract itself. Is this a legally binding document? So if a divorce happens, the spouse can say, hey, or the ex-spouse can say, hey, this is you owe me according to this.
Well, it's binding within a Jewish rabbinical court, if you will. It is. There have been some attempts to bring the ketubah to the courts of the state, so to speak. I'm not an expert in that field. I don't know how successful they have been. So I guess the answer is kind of yes and kind of no.
All right, fair enough. Let's get into the fun stuff. Tell me about the art side of these.
Okay. So as I mentioned, the art form, it goes back about 1,000 years. It's a very rich art form. And one of the things that I find fascinating is that the ketubas from different communities across time in different parts of the world typically were very heavily influenced and looked a lot like the art of the surrounding culture. So as an example, one of the areas where there was a real flowering of Ketubah art was in Venice and the other city-states in the Italian peninsula. And these are gorgeous pieces of work. They tend to be fairly architectural in look. They'll have peacocks on them, which is a symbol of fertility. And they're very influenced by what you may imagine as an illuminated manuscript from the Christian tradition. By contrast, there are ketubahs that are from the Muslim world. For example, some beautiful ones from Isfahan and areas like what are currently Afghanistan, Iran, Persia, etc. And those look very much like the beautifully decorated Muslim manuscripts of the time. Nowadays, they look like almost anything. And, as is documented in my book, they can look fairly traditional on the one extreme to, there's one artist who has beautiful up close photographs of flowers, and the Ketubah text is superimposed very beautifully and effectively on top of that.
Huh, how cool is that? Tell me about the size. I guess I was picturing a contract, the letter size sheet of paper, but if it's
So,
art, I don't think
yeah,
they have to be confined to that.
Exactly. Typically, they are, if you will, art size. So something in the range of maybe 18 by 24 is a very common size. Depending on the couple's preferences nowadays at companies such as Ketubah.com or other artists who are producing work on their own, there usually is an option of going something like that, maybe to something smaller. For example, if you're having a Manhattan apartment, you may not want some giant framed piece of art, or much larger sizes for people who are in maybe a very large home and want to have a real statement piece. So they vary in size, but in terms of how it's used, it is at the ceremony, usually right before the ceremony, in a small room, an intimate space with usually the bride, the groom, the parents, maybe the maid of honor, the groomsman. it will be signed, and then it is usually read out by the rabbi or the wedding officiant, and then afterwards it's framed and hung in the home. So I think the size of it is very much determined by its sort of end use, if you will, in the place of honor, somewhere in the home, maybe in the living room, dining room. Some couples prefer to keep it in the bedroom.
Interesting. So you mentioned peacocks and flowers. How broad or how customized are we talking for the art thing? Is there anything that's not allowed or anything that they must include this or anything of that nature on these?
Okay, well, you ask really good questions. So, traditionally in Judaism, there is, graven, going back to one of the Ten Commandments against graven images, there is a tendency not to include human forms. However, in some notable exceptions, especially during this Italian flowering in the 1700s, there are some gorgeous ketubahs that include images of people. There's even one that comes to mind where there's images of nudes, showing the Garden of Eden, and there's Adam and there's Eve, and that would not be the case in the Muslim world, where the prohibition against human forms was even more strictly observed in the surrounding culture, and those will tend to be more geometric in shape. Although you will see animals, for example, in the ones from the Persian area, there'll be in addition to the rising sun, there'll be the lions. These are symbols of Persian culture and history.
How interesting. Tell me about what gets included. Is this with you, the artist, and a conversation with the couple? Or do you say this is going to be it? Or do they say, hey, throw some lines in there? How do you figure out what's going to be in the art?
A good question. So at the beginning of the revival of this art form, as I mentioned, which is the late 60s, early 1970s, it started off with the couple would meet with an artist. There would be a discussion of the couple's values, maybe how they met, maybe where they met. And the artist would be listening for things that were important to them, including things between the lines, maybe that they weren't speaking about, but that they got a sense of. And that would inform the imagery that would go on the ketubah. That was how it got started. Then at a certain point, the artists realized that there was an interest in um, for couples to be able to buy something that would be a little bit more affordable. So they started to produce reproductions of, I wouldn't say generic designs, but designs that weren't specific to the couple. And nowadays, if somebody comes to Ketubah.com, they would go on our website, and we've got, I think, close to 1,000 different designs, all based on originals from the artist. And the couple will choose one that speaks to them. And then the customization would be, once they choose the design, what text is most appropriate for them based on their level of observance. Is it a Jewish couple, an interfaith couple, an LGBTQ plus couple? What size do they want? Do they want it printed on paper canvas? So there's some customization like that. There's still some folks who prefer and would like to make the investment, which is in the thousands of dollars for a custom piece made for them. But many are coming to places like Ketubah.com, and it's hundreds of dollars to get an archival quality heirloom piece that is virtually indistinguishable from an original.
What was that? Let's shift gears and talk about the medium. So, is for an original, I want to talk about the original, right? Because as an artist, you're putting together this art. Are we talking paint, charcoal, pencil? What are we using?
So the the handed down tradition, if you will, of I'll start with the handed down tradition of illuminated manuscripts, which again was within the Jewish community, Christian community, Muslim community. So oftentimes the design is written and applied to a piece of parchment, which historically would and even currently in some cases would be made from the hide of an animal. If it's for a Jewish document, it would be from a kosher animal, so it might be from a sheep or a goat, and it's sometimes it's referred to as vellum. And then the writing would be done again traditionally with usually it's a goose quill where the end has been sharpened, and then inks that are made out of organic compounds. And then gold leaf would be applied, usually by hand. And that's, by the way, this term illuminated manuscript, that's where it comes from, because these beautiful handwritten manuscript, right, would be embellished with gold, and they would literally sparkle. So they were like illuminated. Nowadays, current technology is used, and current printing, and and it's typically done differently.
So I appreciate you telling me about the illuminated manuscript, because I was thinking, now we got LEDs and all that kind of stuff. You can light up anything. But 1,000 years ago, you had candles. And if you're lighting candles by paper, you're going to have a bad day. So that makes sense with the gold leaf.
Yeah, there's one other thing I'll mention too, which is one of the things that I'm proud of is that my team at our workshop has really done a great job of taking the current print on demand technology and marrying that, pardon the pun, if you will. I love a dad joke, so I just thought I would slip one in.
Nice.
Mar-
You're in good
mar-
company
mar-
here.
so marrying that with handwork. So whether it's laser cutting the design or gold leaf be added or Swarovski crystals applied by hand. My wife and I celebrated our 25th anniversary last summer, and we decided it was time to get a commemorative Ketubah. Doesn't replace our original, but it's a commemorative one, and that one has Swarovski crystals. And I'll tell you, James, when I walk by it, it sparkles. The crystals, somehow they just pick up the regular light from the house, and there's like this sparkling as every time I walk by.
How cool is that? That is impressive. How, I guess, out of all the Jewish families that get married, how many of them are actually getting a ketubah? Is this everyone, or is this 90% or 50%?
I would say that nowadays it's probably in the realm of probably 90% of Jewish couples and maybe a similar number of interfaith couples where one person is Jewish and the other person is not Jewish. There's a great desire for couples of all stripes, so to speak, to connect with tradition because it's a very beautiful part of the wedding. It's also one of the few things that outlasts the wedding and is a permanent, a thing of beauty in the home, in keeping with the tradition of Hidur Mitzvah, which is the beautification of the commandments. So it's something that is beautifully done and very lasting. And it's also thanks to current technology. It's relatively inexpensive. If you think of somebody spending $300 or $400 for one of our beautiful ketubas, well, their wedding probably costs 10,000, 25,000, 100,000, like depending. It's a drop in the bucket, and yet it has so much meaning in terms of beauty and longevity.
That is so true. I was just talking with a business friend of mine about her wedding that's happening in, I don't know, it's 10 months, 11 months, something like that. Because I asked her, like, hey, how's married life? Because she was engaged 6 months ago. I just assumed she was married already because I haven't been planning a wedding in, well, ever. So I just assumed she was married already. I didn't know that people stayed engaged for a year and a half before they got married. And she was talking about all the planning and the cost. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's not what I expected it to be. So I can understand a few $100. Yeah, that's a rounding error with some of these weddings. Holy cow.
Yeah, it certainly can add up. And one of the things that I'm also proud of in terms of Ketubah.com is in addition to the cost, planning a wedding can be very stressful. It's something that usually the couple, there's been some dream of it for years and years, in some cases since childhood. People have imagined what their wedding day was going to be like. On top of that, add the hopes, dreams, and expectations of parents, other family members. So it can be a very stressful thing. So I'm very proud of the fact that, at least with the purchase of the Ketubah, thanks to my team's expertise, empathy, and real human customer service, the Ketubah is one thing that you can just relax. It's not something you're going to have to worry about. We're there to hold your hand every step of the way and make sure that everything is absolutely right.
That is incredible. Tell me about when the couple actually gets to see the ketubah. Is this something that waits until wedding day, or do they get to see it prior to that?
So typically they'll see it in advance. They're usually ordering, I'd say about a month or two in advance is typical. Some couples will be planning further ahead, and it's shipped to them. They will receive it. They'll usually be having a look at it. So it's not a surprise on the wedding day, but it is something that is a special part of it. Opening it up again on the wedding day, having it signed usually by witnesses, usually close friends. So it has a ceremonial element to it, even though it's not being opened for the first time, usually on the wedding day.
Right on. Tell me about the presentation once it's signed. You made it sound like they hang up or they go in the house or bedroom or something of that nature. How are these
Yes.
ketubahs typically presented?
Yeah, so usually they are read out. So imagine the wedding ceremony. It's a Jewish wedding ceremony. Your viewers may have seen one in movies. It takes place under a chuppah, which is a wedding canopy. There at the end of it, it's usually the groom, but Cheryl and I, we both participate in this. Somebody stamps on a glass and everyone says Mazel Tov. The part that isn't always in the movies, but is very much a fixture in most weddings these days, is an artistic ketubah. So the rabbi will read out the ketubah, usually in English, rather always usually in Hebrew and in English as well. It's read out under the canopy, and then oftentimes it'll be mounted on an easel. So that people can see it as they're going to the reception or the dinner afterwards. And then after all that, the couple will take it generally to a local framer and have it beautifully framed so that they can hang it prominently in their home.
Gotcha. That is very cool. Tell me about the when people are ordering this, and I imagine you're doing stuff with people all over the country, all over the world.
All over the world. It very much is an international business. Most of our customers are in the USA and in Canada, although we have many customers in the UK, Australia, and everywhere in between. We've had some very interesting orders over the years from places as far as Singapore, Hong Kong, India. And sometimes these are local people who are ordering. Other times it's expats who are living in a foreign country, having their wedding there, and want to include this in their ceremony.
That's incredible. So tell me, how do you typically meet with them? If they're, let's just say someone's in Singapore, you're in
Now,
Toronto.
yeah, now it's so when I first started, I so at the very beginning it was just me. This is 1996. Okay, so I had a big black artist's portfolio of samples, and couples would make an appointment. I would come to their home or apartment. I would open this large portfolio on their dining room table. They would select the design that they liked. And in those days, this is before the current print on demand technology was available. I would then collect the information from them and from their rabbi, especially for the Hebrew names. And then the artist or a local calligrapher would handwrite the names and location and date into spaces that had been left in the text from the get-go. So there was very much a meeting in person in the early days. I think it was about 10 years ago when we actually stopped having meetings in person, because what we found is that most customers preferred to come to our website, make their selection, and check out. And nowadays there are many customers with whom we never speak to them. We've worked very hard over the 3 decades to have our website interface be so user friendly that you don't have to talk to us. Anybody who wants to, we've got live chat, of course, and we've got real human beings, in 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 Toronto, which is where we're based, and we're there to help in any way that we can.
That it's interesting. You mentioned the website, and I want to ask you this question about your website because it's just super attractive to me. The font that you used for the Ketubah, it's actually ketubah.com. It just shows that. So I don't know if you treat that, it looks like almost as your logo. Is that a font that you created or what font is that? That is an incredible looking font.
That's a good question. You're talking about the Ketubah.com logo?
Yep.
Like at the top of the page. I
Yeah.
don't remember. I mean, I'm wearing a sweatshirt with our old logo. That is a new logo that we came up with. We hired a graphic designer at the time to come up with it. I think it's based on a font, and then parts of it are modified. The first letter K in particular was modified to be very distinctive. But what I will say in an unrelated but related thing is the font of the English and Hebrew writing on the ketubah is very special. It is a font that was developed by a calligrapher by the name of Patty Levy out of Baltimore, Maryland. And she had her had her calligraphy made into a font. These days, there are companies called font foundries who can take an artist's calligraphy and make it into a font. And we've licensed that exclusively from her. And that means that every ketubah that we sell has a calligraphic font that is virtually indistinguishable from if the calligrapher had written it by hand.
Wow. That is amazing. Tell me, you mentioned both Hebrew and English. Is it written, are ketubahs written in both Hebrew and English?
They usually are. Usually it's Hebrew first, followed by English. Having said that, there are some couples, particularly among the more traditional, who will only have a Hebrew text. And in fact, interestingly, the handed down text, it looks like Hebrew, as in it's in the Hebrew alphabet, but it's actually in a different but related language called Aramaic, which was the spoken language in the land of Israel around the time that the Ketubah was codified. It's also the language that would have been spoken in the times of early Christianity. So likely the language that Jesus and his contemporaries would have been speaking. And so that is actually, so for very traditional couples will have that handed down text in Aramaic without English. Now, for many contemporary couples, it doesn't have to just be Hebrew and English. We've done some with other languages, Hebrew and Spanish. We've had some really interesting ones. For example, Hebrew and Mandarin for a couple who had had some background related to Chinese tradition and culture.
Has it been tough to translate or find a translator to go from Hebrew to insert language here?
Well, usually, so we are able to provide a service. So some couples prefer to write their own text, and and we actually I don't think it was soon after ChatGPT came out, we had some fun and we put together a tool which is on the Ketubah.com website, and it is an AI powered Ketubah text writing assistant. And it asks you a couple of questions and you can type in about your shared values, what you love about each other. And then you can select a style ranging from traditional Ketubah text to Shakespearean sonnet, and it will come up with something for you. It's surprising how good it is. Some people are using that for fun. Others are using it more seriously. But my point is that whether you use AI or not, if couples provide us with an English text, we are very capable of translating into Hebrew. If it's a question of translating it to other languages, we usually look to the couple to provide us with the text, any language that they can put on a Word document, whether it's a right to left language or a left to right language. We can accommodate it. We can typeset it beautifully onto their Ketubah.
That is cool. I love it. Let's shift gears into your business. 30 years ago, you started this business. How do you get into the Ketubah business or even decide that you want to be in the Ketubah business?
Well, I'll tell you, James, at the beginning, there were lots of people who told me I was crazy to try and start a business that was just about ketubahs. Now, as you may recall earlier in the conversation, I mentioned that in 1995, I had left my corporate job. I was after business school. I was recruited to work at Procter and Gamble. I spent a couple of years there, learned a ton. I was in there what they call their advertising department, which most of us know as brand management. Learned a ton about strategic business thinking and marketing. Um, but I was really too much of a creative spirit for that sort of a corporate space. So I left there. I went to Jerusalem to study at a yeshiva, a place of traditional Jewish learning. And while I was there, I started networking with artists because I wanted to start a business when I came back home. And I had a couple of ideas. And one of them was to open a brick and mortar gallery of fine art Judaica. Now, you'll notice that I said a brick and mortar gallery. Well, of course, I'd have to say that, except in 1995, you didn't have to say that because the internet was so
They were
young
all
that
brick and mortar.
that was all there was. So I came back home. I engaged the services of a real estate agent, and we started to look at renting storefront. And I started to do calculations about how much it would cost me to invest in inventory and so on and so on. And I was starting to get not quite cold feet, but a little bit concerned about what I was getting myself into. Then I bumped into a very old friend, a man by the name of Scott Wiseman. We had been best friends in elementary school. And he said to me, Michael, I'm leaving social work and I'm going to start building websites. Now, I barely knew what a website was, but long story short, I became his first customer. he built a very simple but effective HTML website, which you can still see today if you go on the Wayback Machine. There's an Internet Archive that's wonderful. It shows up, we launched it July of 96. It shows up for the first time on that archive in December of 96. It's got a little animation. And at the beginning, the company was called Ketubah. Um, and, and even though I had registered the domain name Ketubah.com in the spring of 96, I didn't yet have the idea of it was much later actually that one of my managers at the time had a brilliant idea. She said, "You know what? I don't I don't know if you want to hear this. I don't know if this is a stupid idea, but," I said, "Well, there are no dumb ideas." And her thought was, well, instead of having our company called Ketubah and our website being at Ketubah.com, why don't we just call the whole thing Ketubah.com? So that was when we pivoted. We decided to make our entire website and online retail offering under the name Ketubah.com. Ketubah, there's still other aspects of the business, the wholesale side, whatnot, under Ketubah, but it all came together under Ketubah.com.
That is incredible. So all because you had a buddy, essentially, they knew how to build websites way back in 95.
Yes,
Got this thing
and
going.
because I was young and naive and passionate enough to go ahead, in spite of the naysayers, and do something that I thought was a good idea, that I thought was interesting, that tapped into my personal interests, um, and give it a try. Now, I had that. Luckily, as I mentioned, I was young. I also was single, and I was able to live at a buddy's house very inexpensively. So my costs were very low. So that was a real advantage.
Tell me, you were in the marketing game with Procter and Gamble before, so how did you market Ketubah.com originally way back then?
In the early days, so as I mentioned, we put up a website July of 96, but it was a website that really nobody came to. It wasn't an e-commerce site, and also nobody was online at that time. This is before Google, right? Just to put it in perspective.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I remember
I meant
95. Yeah.
so it's word of mouth within my local community. I'm making appointments, not many, but appointments to go with my Black artist portfolio and whatnot. The next step was that I took out a small ad in some Jewish magazines that helped me to get the word out. I had a toll free number. It didn't ring much, but I did have a toll free number, so that and that number was on the little ads in the magazines, so people could call me. And then a little bit later on, I would rent a booth in the artists section of Jewish conventions. So whether it was like a convention related to one of the streams of Judaism, so for example, the Women's League for Conservative Judaism, they had every 2 years they had a beautiful convention. So I remember I went down. It was in the Catskills at an old school Catskills hotel, and I had a little booth, and I'm showing my ketubahs. So it was one thing after another, trying to use my wits to think about how do I get word out.
Nice. So when you first got the website going, you got this 800 number. Were you offering to meet with people over the phone, or how did that work?
Yes. So for local customers, they could make an appointment, and I would come to their home. For others who were outside of the city, they could certainly phone us, and it would be we had photos. I mean, as I mentioned, we have almost 1,000 designs at Ketubah.com today. At that first website, I think it had something like 2 or 3 dozen designs, so they could get a visual of what they were, what designs were available. There would be examples of the texts that were available, which were pretty limited in those days. Usually at that time, there might be around maybe 3 different texts. So, likely the Orthodox text, conservative text, Reform text. Nowadays, there's 30 plus texts, right? Which include interfaith text, LGBTQ plus texts. We also have texts for couples where one or both of the individuals identify as non-binary. So there's all that. So there wasn't as much choice. Also, at that time, in the very beginning, it was simpler, I would say, in terms of options, because we were not yet producing the ketubahs. We were essentially a reseller, if you will, of limited edition print runs that artists were making themselves. And one thing that I'll say that's kind of cool about that is, so in 9 times out of 10, the product never came through our offices. We had a website. If you imagine sort of a triangle where there's like, here's our website. The customer is looking at the website. They send us their information, so the names, the date, etc., in English and Hebrew. They fax it to us on a form. We send that information to the artist. The artist fills in the information and drop ships it to complete the triangle, if you will, directly to the customer. So in those early days, 9 times out of 10, we didn't actually ever have a hand directly on the product. Nowadays, for the last 15 plus years or so, we've got a full in-house production facility where we license the art from the artist. The artists are paid a royalty for each one that we sell, but it's all produced in-house.
Gotcha. Oh, that's super cool. Tell me, back in 1995, how did you accept payment? Because I mean, we're talking about the crazy infancy
Yes.
of the internet as far as the public is concerned.
Yes, it was very clunky and very early. We would fax people a form which would itemize what they were buying, how much it was. They would then need to sign and date it, fax it back to us. We would manually process the order, and there was an extra step too, because most of our customers were and are in the US, but we're physically in Canada. And so we didn't, at that time, we didn't have access to US dollar credit card processing. So imagine that the people are placing an order and we need to charge them $100. Well, we would then try and figure out, well, how many Canadian dollars should we charge them so that it's going to end up being approximately the right amount without overcharging them. And so on their credit card bill, instead of seeing $100, they might see 98.33 or 99.57 or what have you. So it was a very manual and pretty clunky approach. It was about, I think it was within about 4 years, I think it was around the year 2000 that we graduated to a rudimentary e-commerce site. And there was a company called Cybercash, which made online credit card payments possible. That was a huge step forward. But up until then, it was faxes back and forth, manual processing, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, that's funny. Tell me about the artists themselves. How do you find artists? How did you find them initially that were worthy of what you're looking for? And then how have you found them throughout the years?
Great question. The very first artists were I met in Israel. As I mentioned, there was a man by the name, I didn't say his name, I don't think, a man by the name of Arden Halter, who lives in a place called Pardes Chana, not too far from Haifa in Israel. And through my networking with Judaica artists in Israel, June of 95, I arrived at his front door and he showed me his work, and I was immediately smitten. So initially it was through word of mouth. When I came back, I traveled quite extensively throughout the U.S. and I met artists literally from coast to coast. Nowadays, while of course we're always on the lookout for new artists that are producing high quality work that's different than what we already have and that we think will appeal to our customers, artists will approach us. We're a big fish in a small pond. I mean, Ketubah.com is not a giant enterprise, but in the realm of Ketubahs, we're well known enough that we do have artists approaching us.
Well, I would call that a good problem to have.
Yes, agreed.
Tell me about, so an artist produces, I don't know if it'd be a print, but let's just say an original one. Do they then take that to a photographer or a print shop of some kind that takes the super
That's
fancy picture of it, or how does that work?
that is the beauty of our process. The artists who work with us love it because they get to do what they love to do, which is to produce the original. They then hand it off, and we take care of everything else. And then, essentially, forevermore afterwards, every quarter they get a check in the mail. Well, these days it's a digital deposit, but they get paid a royalty for their work ongoingly. They would send. It used to be they would send us the original. We worked with a fine art scanner in town here that specialized in the scanning. So we took care of that. We absorbed the cost of that, the color correction and all that. Nowadays, there are more artists who will send us digital files, although much of the art is still done originally by hand. But the technology has made that a little bit smoother. But artists love that they can do the art and then leave the rest to us.
That is super cool. Are the prints typically limited? So every artist piece of art, is it limited to 50 or 200 or 5,000 or something like that, or is it just however many people like that one, just plug away?
Our editions are limited. They're printed in limited edition. Everyone comes with a little pencil number on it that tells you what number it is. And our editions are numbered up to 433. Now that's an odd number, right? Like why 433? So I'm very interested in Jewish tradition and ways that we can somehow convey that and incorporate that into our product. So this is a very subtle way. Most people don't even know why, but I'll let you in on the secret. There is a tradition that actually has Kabbalistic roots where each letter of the Hebrew alphabet was assigned a number by the sages. And so the numerical value of the word ketubah in Hebrew, if you add up the letters, it adds up to 433. So we thought, wow, let's do editions of 433. We do actually have some of our premium products that are in smaller numbers. There's some that are as low as 36. 36 also has significance because it's a multiple of 18. 18 has a numerical value of the word chai, which means life. So, but mostly it's this sort of quirky but meaningful number 433.
Nice. That's clever. I love little things like that that are just subtle hints or cues that once you understand them, you're like, oh, that's amazing. But before that, you're just like,
And
133, whatever, some number.
I think it adds something to the product. It also makes my job fun. I just turned 60 and I was 30 when I started this. So I literally have spent half my life on this. And James, people have been asking me, are you thinking about retiring? I'm excited about the next 30 years. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to innovate? And in fact, there are a number of things that we're working on, which I'm very excited about that are, build on, complement, and somewhat, I would say, really quite new.
That is awesome. Tell me about the business when you first started it 30 years ago. You're sleeping on your friend's couch. At what point or how long did it take for it to actually be profitable where you're like, hey, I actually got a real business here that's making money?
I think it was year 3 where we were what we I made a point of saying we from the beginning because I thought it sounded bigger and it sounded good. I think it was year 3 where I was breaking even. In the meantime, I was doing some small marketing consulting gigs on the side to just make ends meet and make sure I could pay my buddy his the rent. I mean, he was charging me $300 a month. I think after the first year, he said, "Okay, you know what? I think I have to charge you a bit more." So then it was $600 a month, and it actually included 2 bedrooms, one room that I slept in, the other room where I had my little computer, my toll-free number. He was gone most of the time because he worked for the Boston Consulting Group. So he's leaving in the middle of the night Monday morning and coming back late Friday night. Uh,
Sounds like the best
so
roommate.
he was terrific. He was really really wonderful. He had a pet name for me. He called me Rabbi. I mean, I'm not a rabbi, but because I was so into my tradition and building this business rooted in Jewish culture, he called me Rabbi.
Oh, that's funny. That is funny. Tell me about your first employee.
So my first employee was a friend who had skill, had some time available, and she would basically come in the morning. I was still living in his house. She would come in. What has to get done? Catalogs need to be stuffed into envelopes. Oh, there's some ketubahs that need to be. And that was going from 0 to 1, as you and your listeners may know, is a very big step, but it was a critical step. And I would say that while I have many skills as a entrepreneur, it would take me an entire morning to stuff our little catalogs into the envelopes and put the stamps on and put the labels on. Or at that point, I was probably handwriting the addresses, whereas somebody else would be able to do that in 10 minutes or 20 minutes. So it was a very early lesson about the importance of delegating and also having people with complementary skills. But what I would say also is from that very first employee and up to this day, there is a common denominator, which is everybody who works for me has a head on their shoulders, is thinking about a little bit, how can I learn? How can I improve? And feels good about contributing and making a difference for our customers.
There, I love it. I love it. That's a very, very big deal when you're hiring people. But it's always the joke, I guess, that good help is hard to find, but bad help you can find no problem. Tell me about the point I guess when you first started your business, you get your new employee. The internet shifted a little bit between, let's call it 95 and 2000. 2001, you get the .com crash because everybody was putting .com after everything. Tell me about that shift. Was there ever a point when you were scared of your business succeeding or not succeeding, or a point where you're like, oh, we got this in the bag. This is easy now.
So yeah, so with the bursting of the internet bubble, I remember being aware of it, but that was not one of the times when I would say I was scared or scared for the business. And I think it's because the business was still quite small, and I made a point from the beginning of growing organically. So I didn't have a giant amount of debt. And I was, many entrepreneurs have a big vision and want to build $1 billion company and will want to grow very quickly. There's a place for that. And I have a lot of respect for folks who are able to do that. That wasn't my vision. And I think because of slow, methodical growth, that even with going through the bursting of the internet bubble, at that point, I wasn't fully reliant on the internet for one thing. And the second thing was because of the methodical growth and not having accumulated a ton of debt, it wasn't one of the points when I was fearful for the business.
Gotcha. So over the course of 30 years, I don't know any metrics on marriage as far as if there's ebbs and flows or if the same amount of people get married every year. Have there been lean years and other years where you're just like, oh my gosh, everybody in the world's getting married?
Well, I'll talk first about, I guess, the most notable year, which was a very lean year. So, your listeners will recall in March of 2020 when the pandemic was declared and everything was
Oh,
being
yeah.
shut down. That was a time literally from one week to the next where our orders tanked by 80%. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and that was a scary time. And it continued through like say the early year or two of the pandemic. Orders were way down. Um, I'm proud of the fact that I made a commitment to my team that I would do everything in my power during the uncertain times ahead to provide ongoing employment and financial security. And I did a calculation about how far in the hole I would be willing to go personally to make that possible. I was then very fortunate that the government of Canada stepped in and provided wage subsidies, which really helped to make it possible beyond, I think, what I would have been able to sustain, and kept everybody fully employed, most from home, of course, um, full time at full salary throughout the pandemic, and made really good use of the time because, of course, with the order numbers being so low, everyone had time to get to the projects that we don't usually get to. And I believe that because of that, we came out of the pandemic stronger, and then we're ready by, I think it was around year 3 or so that we saw a record year of sales where thankfully those folks who had canceled or delayed their weddings then had their weddings and came back to us. And this is an important distinction between what was available for my business versus, say, hotels, restaurants that just could not. You can't recoup that lost revenue or those meals that weren't ordered. The orders came back, and we then had one record year, and then after that, we were sort of back to more or less where we had been before, with some ongoing steady growth.
That is interesting. It's funny because you remind me of way back when I used to deliver beer. And if there was a holiday or something of that nature, like the beer had to be delivered, people drank the beer. But on a holiday, we were closed, which just meant that either one day, pre or post, you were working twice as hard for essentially the same amount of money. And it was funny because you realize like there's certain industries where that's just the thing. Trash pickup is one of them where I'm thinking of. And there's other industries like what you got going on. When there's a lull, there's a compensation for that lull after that. And you can make it work and essentially make your money, make your business go. Over the course of time, it averages out. But other industries, there is no average. There's a finite level of time. So it's very interesting that way.
And of course, though, when you're in the middle of that downturn, you don't know, right? You kind of hope, because as entrepreneurs, we need to hope, but we also need to plan, and you don't know if that wave is going to write itself if those customers will come back, or if purchase patterns or preference will change in the meantime. So there certainly is risk and concern, but thankfully, and I'm very grateful to my staff, to our customers, that those orders did come back eventually.
It's interesting. You mentioned doing the math, because I remember doing that math. I want to say almost weekly, certainly monthly, to figure out how long can I afford to keep us in business if there's this drop in revenue, or if this drop in revenue sustains or grows. Like, everything was so touch and go. And you're like, okay, I don't see this lasting forever, because if it lasts forever, we have other problems as a
True.
society.
True.
But
Yeah.
how long is that runway to figure out what can we afford to do, and how much am I willing to spend to keep the business in business, which is a very, very, very bad math problem to have to do. Not
It
a fan
is.
of that math problem,
No,
but yeah,
no.
I definitely remember doing that way back when. So
Yeah.
glad we're out of that hole. That was fun.
Well, and I think what one
Tell me,
what I was just
no,
going
go
to
ahead.
say
Go
that
ahead.
one thing that grounded me as I was making that agonizing calculation was reminded myself that as an entrepreneur, I benefit from the upsides in a way that an employee doesn't. And this was a time when I also, uh, I take the hit for the downsides in a way that an employee doesn't. So my feeling is, over time, this is what I signed up for, and it's not all going to be beautiful, gravy train and roses and all that sort of thing. And this is part of there are the ups and the downs, and I'm here through both of those.
Oh, absolutely. Totally. Yeah. No, that's the game, right? That's the game of entrepreneurship, and not everybody necessarily has the stomach for it. And
Exactly. And I
sometimes when you
also
think
I
you do,
also felt like I owed it to my team, who really were there day in and day out before, and continued to be there throughout. And most of them are still with me to this day. Some I think it's been 18 years for my longest standing employee. I've got others that are at 15 years, 12 years. Yes. I'm very,
good for
very,
you.
very
That's
blessed.
incredible. Is your team all in Toronto, or are they remote?
Yeah, so we're all in Toronto, except uh, there are I've got three team members who are working physically in the office. That's where the production happens, the printing, the laser cutting, the shipping. And then I've got the rest of the team. There are five other team members who are working from their homes, but all yeah.
Gotcha. That is super cool. So I guess, Michael, before we take off here, is there anything that you would, I guess, inspiring things or things that you learned that you wish every entrepreneur would know? You've been in business 30 years, which is a huge, oh my gosh, it's a huge milestone. So congrats for that. What is some advice that you would give an entrepreneur that was just starting out?
Well, number one is follow your passion, and look for uh, look for a pain point. When I first started, the revival of the art Ketubah was already 25 years in. Most people wanted one, and it was difficult for them to find the artists. So there was a pain point that aligned with my passion. Second thing would be play the long game, if you will, as in just set your eyes on something and keep at it. A lot of people said to me at the beginning, you can't possibly have such a focused business just on Ketubahs. And I stuck with it. And over the long term, and over 5 or 6 different total rebuilds of my website, kept asking the question, how can I make this better for my customers? So I think those would be my main takeaway. And the last thing would be to keep innovating. As I mentioned, I wrote a book on the topic, which is published by the Jewish Publication Society. We recently launched a Jewish lifestyle magazine, which helps to make us relevant and provide value to our customers when it's not time for a ketubah. We just launched a line of artistic family trees, which are perfect for when your mother, father, grandfather has their 75th, 90th birthday. What do you get someone who has everything? So I think it would be around keep growing, keep innovating, and keep trying to do better by your customers your staff, and your suppliers.
That's incredible. I love it. Tell me, Michael, really quick about your book. What made you decide to write and publish a book?
Sure. So it was a labor of love. It was over a period of time. Starting in 2013, I wrote an email to David Moss, who was an artist who came and presented one evening when I was studying in Jerusalem back in '95. And I said to him, I think it's been about 50 years since you started to take the lead and revive this art form. I think there should be an exhibition on this topic. And so at first it was about an exhibition, then it morphed into a book. I started doing my research, and it's come full circle in a nice way. Is that today I now have a traveling exhibition that ties in with the book, and so when I'm going to speak on about my book, oftentimes the host organization says they order the exhibition in advance, and so it's a beautiful immersive visual example of the art form so that people can interact with it as I'm speaking about it.
How cool is
So,
that?
yeah, so it's been quite a journey.
That's incredible. Who is your target market for the book? Is it people that are interested in Ketubahs as far as getting one and want to learn more of the history? Or who's reading a book like this?
Yeah, so it is so engaged couples, their parents and grandparents who are very, for whom the ketubah is something very relevant and topical. Also, people who are interested in Jewish art and cultural developments, because it really is a revolutionary sort of incident, if you will, in contemporary artistic and cultural development over the last 60 years. And also, there's also some interest among rabbis, cantors, and wedding officiants who are also very much in that space and have a great interest in ketubahs.
How cool is that? Michael, you have an amazing business going on. 30 years in business. You got the book. You got the website that started way back in 95 when websites were, we'll call it rare, I guess. And you kept the same domain for 30 years. Holy cow. That's longer than I think just about any website that I can think of, maybe save for whoever keeps track of websites. So that's amazing. You got a good thing going on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to talk with you today. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. Michael, can you tell us that website one more time?
Sure. So it's ketubah.com. It's spelled K-E-T like Tom, U, B like boy, A-H.com. Ketubah.com.
I should ask you, is there some kind of history of that word or what it means, or is that just a
Yes.
word somebody came up with?
Absolutely. It's a Hebrew word. It means written. It comes from the same root as some modern Hebrew words, like the word for letter is michtav. So it means it's a written document, and it's called a written document in part to distinguish it from the verbal agreements that would have happened in biblical times. Earlier times, there would have been an agreement, oftentimes between the two families. So this is a written document that formalized the agreement, and as I mentioned earlier, provided very important protections for the wife in the event that she would find herself on her own.
That is clever. I love it. This has been Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggles, stories, and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. My name is James Ketubah, and Authentic Business Adventures is brought to you by Calls on Call, offering call answering and receptionist services for service businesses across the country on the web at callsoncall.com. And of course, the Bold Business Book, a book for the entrepreneur in all of us, available wherever fine books are sold, as well as Live Switch. With Live Switch, you can take live videos with your clients to save you time and money. Check them out at liveswitch.com. If you're listening or watching this on the web, if you could do us a huge favor, give us a big old thumbs up, subscribe, and of course, share it with your entrepreneurial friends. And if you have a ketubah, let us know what you included on there that may be kind of fun. We'd like to thank you, our wonderful listeners, as well as our guest, Michael Shapiro of Ketubah.com. And Michael, thank you so much for being on the show.
James, thank you so much.
Past episodes can be found morning, noon, and night at the podcast link found at drawincustomers.com. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. I want you to stay awesome. And if you do nothing else, enjoy your business.